I'm really delighted to be moderating this third panel of the day and continuing in the tradition of the really excellent input and discussion and questions that have gone on already today. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about transitioning women into high demand jobs in high demand sectors. When the Committee for Women's Advocacy from the Chamber of Commerce created some recommendations for the federal government for us to look at as a business community during the pandemic, one of the recommendations we made, because women had been so adversely affected by the pandemic, because they were in so many sectors that were so decimated by the pandemic, one of the recommendations we made was to really support, encourage, find ways to help women and entrepreneurs and others find jobs in these, high demand jobs in high demand sectors. And so that's the purpose of our panel discussion today. As the president of 3M Canada, we're obviously very interested in supporting STEM education and getting people engaged in STEM and creating those future leaders. And I think this is a great way to have those discussions. I'm delighted to be joined by four impactful, strong women leaders. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have Candace, Rushmi, Zabeen, and Lenna who are here. We're going to just start by having them introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about why they're part of this panel, why they're passionate about this topic, and why they're here as part of the discussion today. So we'll start with you, Candace.
Thanks, Penny, and happy to be here today. Great topic and great group. I'm Candace Laing. I work for Nutrien. Nutrien is Canadian headquartered, world's largest fertilizer and agricultural solutions company. And as of a month ago, I was leading the sustainability and ESG efforts in the company, and then just recently joined the executive leadership team as the Chief Human Resources Officer. So have navigated many of my own probably struggles and questions through, having impact in a high demand sector, and just looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks, Penny.
Thanks. Rushmi.
Thank you so much, Penny, for the opening. Near and dear to my heart is this topic, having been a tech entrepreneur for many years and now transitioning over to working on helping women create pathways into meaningful careers in cybersecurity. I'm at Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst at Toronto Metropolitan University, and really excited to have this conversation, because this is what we've been really working to do, is looking at the skills gap that is everybody talks about in cyber. Got 25,000 jobs open, 50,000 jobs, and only 15% representation of women in the industry. So it's definitely a high demand growth area, and we're creating meaningful pathways for women who are chefs, accountants, number of different backgrounds, and bringing them into cyber. So this conversation today falls really well in line with our mission and values.
Awesome. Looking forward to the stories that you have to share, Rushmi. Zabeen.
Hi. Hello, everyone. So I'm maybe a little bit unusual in this group. I'm now, I've done my full-time, full-on executive career. I was at RBC for 1,000 years, as I often say, and I was the chief HR officer for 10 years. Also had responsibility for corporate citizenship until I retired in 2017. As CHRO, of course, I played a very active role in our broader diversity and inclusion strategy. Actually, in 2002, before I was CHRO, created our diversity strategy, which really was very holistic: talent, customers, communities. Women are 50% of all of those. And so we very much took that, it's not just the right thing, but the smart thing to do. And now we're a few generations later of our focus on women. In my current third act, as I call it, purposeful third act, I do a number of different things. I'm at Deloitte, where I'm an advisor in future of work. And again, talent is everything, and women are 50% of that group. Perhaps what I bring maybe a little bit different to this conversation, and hopefully we can get into it. I think about it as high demand, high sector, and high impact. I think that's an important add because women have a lot to contribute in new and different ways. And for me, having spent 20 of my 40 years at RBC in human resources, I think that human resources is actually also a high demand, high impact profession, and one where there are a lot of opportunities for women. In fact, I'd like to see more men in this profession. And so hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that as well. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to pursue the high impact. I think that's a really interesting twist that you bring to the words and calling it out. And certainly, last but not least, Lenna, please introduce yourself, and thanks for joining us today.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. My name is Lenna Turner. I am Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Salary.com. Salary.com is a SaaS organization leading technology in compensation and pay equity. So my perspective today hopefully can bring some insights into and maybe have a little bit of conversation about pay equity as it relates to women. If you've been listening to the news at all, you know that pay equity is all over the news. There's lots of talk, legislation around pay transparency. So I have a lot of passion around that, being a compensation professional for a long time before I took the role as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So that's my excitement of being here today, and hopefully I can add something to the conversation.
I have no doubt you don't have to hope. I know you absolutely will. So thank you to our panelists. Before I turn to questions, so I have 2 or 3 questions that we've thought about a little bit in advance to help guide the conversation, but certainly encourage all of you attending and everyone in the audience to please send in your questions and help us dig deeper into some of the topic areas that we start to explore. So Rushmi, I was going to start with you with kind of this first kickoff question, because you started to talk about it specifically to Rogers and cybersecurity. What are effective things that businesses can do to support their existing employees in upskilling, or encouraging them to look at different opportunities or change careers or skill sets?
Thanks so much, Penny. I love this question because what we're starting to see right now is women are opting out of different professions, and we need to help them to gain pathways into different professions if the current profession isn't working for them. And what we've done, and we've partnered with Rogers and RBC. So Zabeen, happy to hear about the RBC connection, very meaningful to us because RBC has created a pathway for women in cyber. And what we've looked at with them are women who are being naturally displaced through personal choice, to leave a certain area of the organization, or maybe due to planned attrition, looking at how do we create pathways for them to choose a new career that is of interest, meets their requirements to look after family. A lot of demands for childcare is coming up now after the pandemic, individuals not wanting to commute, different type of work environments. And what does that next job look like? So we don't lose the talent within these organizations, losing that organizational history that's been built and being able to pathway them into new areas. So for example, what we've done is looked at individuals who may have been in the fraud department and looking at those skills that they bring in fraud detection and showing them a pathway into cyber has been really interesting. Creating that interest, building up, the cybersecurity is a career path that allows for flexibility, that it gives new ways of learning and being able to apply what you've been doing, but now applying it to a new career. And I think we have to start working with organizations of keeping that talent pool. So whether it's upskilling into the next job, but also why not looking at lateral moves into different departments altogether, looking at moves that are across the organization. So we're not static. And I think right now what I do see is RBC is leading the pack in that with us, and we're really excited to have that. And I think we're going to start to see more Canadian organizations stepping up because we don't want to lose that talent.
So Rushmi, I love that first of all, that it's a partnership and you're thinking about how to work together with other organizations. And then also helping women uncover or be confident in the skills that they have. Your example of the fraud department and what the skill sets are and how it translates over, I think is a really great example of we all have many skills. We just tend to put them in certain buckets and we don't necessarily think about them more broadly or may not even know where or how they apply. So providing someone with that direction and that help to decide where they go is really valuable. So Candace, from your perspective and your role as you think about upskilling in the organization and different pathways, what are your perspectives on it?
Well, I think in Nutrien, there's two things that come to mind that we've had some success with. And one is, having cohorts of women together for accelerated development. And that accelerated development is pretty exciting because it's not only about exposure, to the business and all areas of the business and how we run the business and just, opening that up for the cohort. But there's also action learning projects in there where outside of maybe your current area completely, you take on a project for the organization with a team and deliver something of value, but with the second and equally weighted goal of your learning and getting exposure to a completely different part of the business. So it's really a win-win in running some of those accelerated development programs. And then on a more individual basis for any part of the business and any leader, really building an awareness and comfort level with leveraging step-out assignments. So this could be where we actually value, taking someone who may not have done this piece of work before or taken on this type of project before, but like in the program, the secondary and equally weighted goal in that is that we're developing the person in that step out assignment and supporting them so that they come out of that step out assignment not only having contributed something of value to the organization, but we've strengthened a key talent and got them ready to contribute in different ways in the organization. So those are two things that I definitely think are worth considering, is those accelerated development programs in cohorts when you can get women together for that, and then also on a more individual basis, managing those step out assignments and opportunities to really upskill and gain that exposure and skill set as well.
I love that you call them step out experiences. I think that's a fantastic way to describe it, and puts it in a really positive and learning kind of mode for people to get engaged with. Thank you. Lenna, your thoughts about what businesses can do to support staff and women in upskilling and pursuing other careers and thinking more broadly about what they can do and where they can go.
So I agree wholeheartedly with what Candace said and what Rushmi has said earlier. I love the idea of step out assignments or stretch assignments, as we call them in places where I've been. Those are great ways to get exposure to different parts of the business and to really stretch maybe some part of your skill set that you had not utilized in your current role. So I've seen things like that and mentorships, and then it gives you exposure to different parts of the business. So you start to make new networking relationships that help you sort of think through maybe things that you hadn't thought about before. So those are some things that you can do from a perspective of the business, but also taking a skills assessment. I think a business can actually just sort of look across their population for upcoming sort of openings, take a skills assessment, look at what skills are really needed, then be intentional about seeing if there are women who you can help upskill in that area or in those areas. Also, outside training is very good. There are lots of really great certifications through higher education that I've seen companies sort of offer to the women in their organizations that help with overall skills or new sort of introductions to areas that are like in high demand, like diversity, equity, inclusion. You can look at that as a high demand job because of, so many things that are going on and the need for that role. So lots of things with regard to stretch assignments, assessing your own training and development internally and externally, and creating those mentorship kind of relationships across the organization.
I wanted to come back to mentorship because it was a big discussion when our first speaker, Manjeet, talked this morning, because she talked a lot about the power of mentorship. But I want to, Zabeen, turn to you for you to share your thoughts about what can we do as businesses to support and really facilitate this acceleration.
Yeah, thank you. So when you go last, you have a chance to build on what people have said. I do want to pick up on Rushmi's point around internal mobility. And, I talk about it as turbocharge internal mobility. I was at RBC my entire career, and 25% of people moved into new roles every year. I worked in retail operations, technology, credit cards, strategy, HR. And we may have called it different things at that time, but really what that does, it builds people's muscle as well. It builds growth mindset, capacity to learn, motivation to learn. And that is a very underutilized opportunity in organizations, and not difficult to do if you can change mindsets of leaders and managers to move away from, you don't need the people to have the technical expertise. They can actually learn that. And then how do you also turbocharge that learning? Also want to pick up on the cohorts. I agree 100%. I've seen the benefits of cohorts. And perhaps an element that I will add to this conversation is intersectionality. It's really important to point out that the experiences of women are not all the same. I have conversations with women and men for that matter, but certainly with women all the time. And, I will frequently have a Black woman or an Indigenous woman or a South Asian woman say to me, Zabeen, I don't see myself in the work that's being done around the advancement of women, because there are different life experiences, different barriers that have that are faced, different biases that they experience. And that's for me a really important aspect, where I've also seen cohorts actually have that intersectionality. So you may have one cohort, but then you also break up into different groups where there's that opportunity to really dig deep and create the safe space for people to talk about that. And then I think the third thing that I would say there, and I tend to talk maybe a little bit industry agnostic, because now I really work across all sectors. Another high growth, high demand area is skilled trades. There are 700,000 retirements projected in Canada by 2028. Those are well-paid jobs. With technology today, many of the physical demands that were required and perhaps meant that fewer women wanted to go into those areas, but those barriers have been removed. The technology is being used in the skills trades, and there's a lot of flexibility. Just think, if your plumber could come outside of the 9 to 5 time frame, how much better it would be for customers. And so for women who have care responsibilities, that can be very attractive. And the final point I would make around that is there's a lot of stigma with the skills trades, and there's a lot of stigma in certain communities as well, new immigrant communities, for example. People come to Canada, there's this view of everything is about going to university and going into certain areas. And I would encourage not just the skilled trades organizations, but organizations where large number of jobs or roles are being becoming redundant, or technology is really automating a lot of what's done, can you work to actually transition people into some of those skilled trades area into a very different career, but one that can also be very rewarding?
I love the comment about skilled trades. I'm really glad that you brought that forward, Zabeen, because I do think that's part of to me, that is a high demand, high impact sector where there are many opportunities. And I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of young women through some Skills Ontario work that I've been engaged with, who are spokespeople for skilled trades, and just amazing and well accomplished, and on an amazing career trajectory. So a lot of what you said really resonated with me, because at 3M we tend to stay for many years, but we have many careers, and we learn and we do different things and we stretch ourselves. And so I think it is an opportunity across all companies to be able to do that. Before I move to the next question, though, a couple of you mentioned the power of mentorships, and we did talk about that this morning. And I wanted to circle back maybe for a couple of minutes and just ask a couple of you around the role you see of mentorship in upskilling or looking at new careers, or how that can be helpful to women, to anyone inside the organization. And Zabeen, I'm not going to ask you to go last, but I'm going to go ask Lenna, and then Zabeen, maybe your thoughts on that mentorship role and how that can play an important part in business to help people transition or find new paths.
Great. I think it's absolutely one of those roles that can be just pivotal in how you choose your next step or your next role. And it really works well when it's a mentorship relationship that has nothing to do with what you're doing right now, because that person has the objectivity to sort of talk you through different parts of the organization that you just don't have maybe that exposure to. They might be able to introduce you to others in different parts of the organization, but really it's that whole business of meeting with someone to talk about where you are, what you like to do, how you see things, how you see the organization around you, how you might move within that organization, and getting a perspective of someone it can be a lateral kind of perspective, it can be vertical, up, down. I think of mentorship in many different ways. It just doesn't always have to be traditionally what we think someone more senior than us, but it is where you want to get someone who has knowledge that can help you move through the organization and understand what your next role might be.
Awesome. Thank you. Zabeen, your thoughts?
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, I've always thought about mentorship as being reciprocal. When I think back to myself early on in my career, even then, as a mentee, I always took it upon myself to bring ideas and to actually help the mentor solve some of their problems, because that does distinguish you as well as somebody that is ready for more. And that's what I do today. I have a lot of more time now in this stage, and I do mentor a lot of people. And when I meet with people, I ask them to bring me 3 questions and 1 thing they can teach me. So that reciprocity is always there. And then the second element I would say is I'm also, mentors speak with and sponsors speak about. What we see with research, women tend to have more mentors, men tend to have more sponsors. And it's the sponsors that put your name on the table when staffings are being discussed. It's the sponsors who say, I know that she can do the job. You have my word. And in my career, the 2 most or 3 maybe most pivotal roles that I made were because of sponsors who really got to know me well. It may have started as a mentoring relationship, but then it really went to put Zabeen on the job. And that's carried through. Even I sit on a corporate board now, and that's my former boss, former CEO, who said to someone that you may not see her as an obvious choice for the board seat, but here is what I have seen her do. Here is what I have seen her do as a broad business leader beyond what you would see her as more vertically as an HR leader. So a huge fan of sponsorship.
And I agree with that exactly, because those are the people who talk about you in the room.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's exactly what my experience has been from a mentorship who transitioned into more of a sponsor. So that's a great example, Zabeen.
So I think you must be looking at the questions, because there's a question that came up that said, what's the difference between a mentorship and a sponsorship in transitioning someone into high demand sectors? And so Rushmi, as you think about mentorship versus sponsorship, how do you get a sponsor? So we talked about evolving mentors into sponsors, but are there other routes that people can take to have sponsors?
Sorry, I'm in a very noisy area. My apologies, everyone. One of the things that I've seen with sponsorship, and similar to Zabeen and Lenna, my career has come from sponsorship, as well as my own businesses. When I ran my multiple tech startups, and came from sponsors. And you find sponsors who are in the industry, in the areas that you want to be in, but also they're your trusted advisors. It could be a friend. It doesn't have to be something as formal as some going and being scary and asking someone in a company. It could be the individual that you're sitting at a wedding, and you learn about one another and you start to put yourself out there. And I think finding sponsors in the most untraditional ways sometimes brings the most value back, similar to what Lenna said, Zabeen said about the person that she built the closest relationship to became a sponsor. And you don't expect that. And the same has happened with me, where it's an individual who I put myself and say, I really need your help. I want to move up. I'm not exactly sure. And it's different than a mentorship, because you're looking for something new. You're looking for someone to advocate on your behalf. Just like Lenna said, someone who's going to speak about your skills, your capabilities, and make connections that others don't see in the room that you're not sitting at. So who's going to advocate for you in the room that you want to be in, or at a table that you want to be in? And really put together a pitch, right? It's about knowing yourself, knowing why you're asking for that next move, but they're not the person who's going to give it to you. That's the difference, right? They're not the one who's going to give you the next move. They're the ones who are going to advocate for you. They're the ones who are going to say, okay, give me the 5 reasons why that I should put my reputation out there for you. Give me the pitch, show me and demonstrate to me who you are, so I can put your whole self forward. Because when you are looking at career transitions or making that next move up or trying to figure yourself out, you have to put the totality of your entire being in this, entrusted in this individual. So look for individuals who are not the key decision makers, but who can sponsor you into that room and that table. But vulnerability, that's the hardest thing. And I think as women, sometimes we don't, we emulate a way of being because we see men do strength or a certain level of skills get put forward. But for women, if we show up with our totality of our vulnerability, it really makes a difference. And I think it's one of our key strengths that we need to leverage as we look for sponsors.
And we all know that men traditionally apply for jobs way more that they may not be as qualified for than women, because we want to be totally qualified. And so now with that sponsorship, we can start to build that confidence and just move forward and understand where we want to go a little more and catch up.
Awesome. That's a great point. Candace, any thoughts to build on we've done a pretty good gamut of mentorship and sponsorship.
No, it was a very good explanation of that. I just think, and this does get into what Lenna was just talking about, it's sad but true that there are differences, in our patterns of how we think about career decisions and what we go for and what we don't. And so the role of sponsorship is so critical. And I've mixed feelings about my own experience, but when I look back, every major move I made came from a critical nudge from somebody, whether it was formal or informal sponsorship, saying, no, you should go for this, you can go for this. And needing that boost, because we do, to Lena's point, have these different patterns, perhaps as women. Not all of us, but a lot of us do. And so it's really, really critical.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. And so we talked about what businesses can do, what we can do inside, what we can do ourselves. So what wider supports or initiatives do you think are needed to support women's transition? So we've talked, a little bit about, is it government legislation, about policies, about funding? What is the role of institutions and academia in this as well? So what other supports do we need to help women make those transitions? And Zabeen, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. So this whole issue of reskilling transition is, in my view, one of the most critical issues ahead of us for our economy, for our society, for building inclusive growth and prosperity. And I worry a little bit that there isn't sufficient focus and urgency around this issue in a collective sense. There are organizations that are doing work in that space, but for me, my sort of big dream aspiration is, how can Canada become a nation of lifelong learners? What can we do with business, government, educators, not-for-profits, labor unions, in individuals, civil society, we should be able to come together and galvanize around this issue and put aside political cycles, election cycles, and really have people. I would love to see prominent business leaders, politicians, university presidents, labor union leaders step up and say, we're going to tackle this issue of reskilling and upskilling at scale, because that's what we're talking about. That's what's different today than perhaps previous industrial revolutions, where not all industries were affected. Today, it's all industries, and it's also the public sector, where there are millions and millions of jobs in the public sector. So that's that. How can we elevate this to one of our biggest opportunities and turn these challenges into a long-term plan? Then you get into the policies and approaches later. And I'll give you just a very quick example of something that I could see playing out. So there are certain, and let's focus it on women. There are certain roles where women there are a higher proportion of workers in those roles. So, and we know that those roles are going to be impacted by automation or other other changes. So can you bring in particularly small and mid-sized businesses that can't do this on their own? So how do you bring in government, for example, and saying, okay, so we know this is going to happen. The individuals can't go to school or can't go to build their skills at night or on weekends because they have other care responsibilities. Can you give them a day off work a week funded by government programs already? And instead of waiting till people are unemployed, to actually advance that money earlier. And how do you get universities, colleges, other educational institutions to develop much more flexible training? How do you bring business leaders into the classrooms? That to me is a bit of that practical approach to turn the way we do things today, which is wait until it's happened, until somebody's out of a job, to doing it ahead of time. And the social benefits of that are massive as well, which turn into economic benefits. So that's an example of an ecosystem across all of the sectors.
I love the way you think about it as an ecosystem, because it isn't just one area that can manage it. It is about all of us coming together. And actually, one of the things that you touched on that I'll come back to maybe in the Q&A was, one of the questions that came in was, how do you earn while you learn? So we talked a lot about what businesses can do to help people upskill, but there are people who are going to make career decisions or change careers that have nothing to do with what they're doing today, and it's not part of their job, and they're still going to have to continue to earn while they learn. So we'll come back to that in the Q&A, but I don't want to lose sight of that because I think that's a really important component of this and giving people the supports to be able to make those career choices or think about that. Candace, other supports you think need to be in place out there to be able to make these transitions and assist in these transitions?
Well, I'm going to go a slightly different direction with the question because I think there's something that I've learned that no matter what the initiative or support, whether it's government or post-secondary or in our businesses, I see the same pattern, which is when we look to what's needed and what the solutions are, we usually give that responsibility to the underrepresented group to figure out and implement. And in my experience, I'm like, that actually, if you think that through, doesn't make sense. Who is the dominant group with the power and ability to actually change the system? And it's our men. And so I've just been digesting this lately, and it's been a real pivot in when I think about what supports, what initiatives, and who's leading them. And now I have a real commitment to men need to lead this change because they are, in fact, the ones in the positions of power, dominance in society, in our culture, in our businesses, and those opportunities. So leaning heavily into that, Penny, and I think that's something that we can all take forward in any support and initiative, in any kind of sector and body working on this.
I think that's a great perspective. Lenna, your thoughts on it?
So I'll take it a little bit into the realm that I work in every day. No matter what we do in terms of reskilling or upskilling, basic or fundamental support, I think, is to maintain pay, try and achieve pay equity for whatever the changes that women are going through or whatever change in career. We can do our best as a company to look at pay equity analysis to understand if a woman changes jobs, how is her pay impacted? We know that it's more likely to be impacted for women because of the many roles that women play, because they go in and out of the workforce more quite often than men do. So from what I do every day and what I see, the way to support a woman or anyone really is through pay equity, because it creates what I like to call a sustainable way of life. And at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do, but it's also creating a sustainable way of life. So if you think about whatever you're trying to do from a skills perspective or upskill or career perspective, maintain that fundamental piece of pay equity and looking at being transparent about it, which I think is a catalyst for pay equity, being transparent. And the more we live in this world today, the more we're going to have to deal with transparency around pay and compensation. So, and women are impacted by that a lot. So that's my take, because that's how I think we can fundamentally support whatever we're talking about today for women.
Fantastic. And Rushmi.
Well, I look at it as, there's so many programs that exist for reskilling, but the first thing that we have to look are to the barriers of entry into these programs and the barriers of entry into the careers that we're trying to transition the future of work into. And many of those barriers that we need assistance in is barrier of economic access to the training programs. So working together with government and corporations to decrease the cost of accessing the programming. Then there's the actual length of program and how programs are designed for the reskilling. So we've heard, the ability for someone to be able to earn an income while they're in these training programs, the ability to have fair pay to be able to say, I am transitioning my career, but I also have to look after my bills, and ensuring that we're providing economic support during that length of the program. And then the program itself, whatever the reskilling is that we're looking at nationally, has to be in a certain time frame. So decrease the time for the training and increase that impact that we want to have quickly, because decreasing the time in training is going to decrease the time to employment. And many individuals do choose not to make career change because the prohibitiveness of a college program, a university degree program, 2 years, 4 years, And the investment of time is something that we have to actually lower. These are barriers of entry into many professions. So having government and industry, as well as the academia, working together to address the barriers of entry and making them lower is going to be what we need as a society to be able to encourage career change, to be able to encourage individuals who maybe, and I'll use STEM as an example, women who did not choose STEM coming out of university and now saying, I may want a career in STEM. I want a career in networking and computer science, in the skills trades, because I wasn't encouraged. But the time for me to train, or the cost of training is too high, I will stay where I am. So we have stagnation or women opting out of the professions altogether. So we need to work as collectively to lower those barriers of entry so we can decrease the time to employment, so we're having a bigger impact in the industries where we have the skills gap. We're really lucky, and I'll just say, because of the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, due to our funding from federal government, Rogers Communication, RBC, City of Brampton, TMU, we have lowered all those barriers, and we currently have the highest rate of women in our 60% of our students are women, and they're the fastest to be employed. So it can be done. We have a proven model that I'd love to see happen in other industries.
Rushmi, I'm going to ask you more questions about that, but not while we're doing our panel, because that sounds really quite interesting. Yeah, sounds amazing. So I wanted to have one more question for everyone on the panel before we open it up to Q&A, and we have a few questions that have come in. So we have about 8 minutes. So maybe just a lightning round. So Candace, your advice that you would give to women themselves who are looking to change careers.
All right. Well, I just did a career change in the last number of years, so I have a good example of this. Although Lena's point, I just want to raise about, feeling like we need to be 200% qualified to leap at an opportunity and make that change. That was so true for me, and I'm still working at getting outside and around that mindset that I think so many women have. But in addition to that very good point, I would recommend involve those you love in these decisions and those that you care about most, because I almost made a huge mistake. I had just worked on the merger and was presented with a career change opportunity, not knowing if I could or should take it on, because it would be a heavy lift. And I happened to take my 11-year-old for coffee on the weekend and said, I'm looking at this opportunity, but I'm not going to take it. I said, I think I'm going to take a step back, regroup, pause. And to my surprise, my 11-year-old said, why? And I said, well, I feel like I have too many trade-offs and I'm not, living up to my responsibilities to you. And he's like, oh, Mom, I'm good. You go do you. and I was just like taken aback, and it was just a happenstance opportunity, filling our coffee chat time. It wasn't intentional. Now I'm very intentional about those conversations and don't make those decisions based on assumptions, I think, about the impact on those around me. So in addition to Lena's very good point, I would offer that is don't make assumptions about those decisions and the impact on those you love until you ask them.
11-year-olds are very wise, aren't they?
Apparently today they are.
Rushmi, what's your advice?
Candace, I'm listening to your story and I actually got choked up because very similarly, my daughters, when I closed one of my businesses, it hadn't gone the way I wanted after a couple of others that had, good exits. And I was really down, and I sat there with my two girls and they said, Mama, do whatever you want. And very similar, it was, I'm making choices that I thought were going to impact them. And they're like, no, you got to do this for you. And if you want to go and work at the university, which is something so foreign to me, and they said, we've got you covered. And you're right, you have to get your family involved. And if you are looking at a career change, spend a little time reflecting upon yourself, reflecting on, the aspirations that you may have had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and why that still comes up and why that calling is still there or something new that's excited you, explore it, lean into it. And, you know, the worst that can happen, it doesn't work out and you move on to something else. But all of those experiences gained are yours. And they can be used in other ways, redeployed in other ways. And I love what Candace said, and now I'm going to use that as my mantra: get your loved ones involved, because they are not going to let you steer your heart in the wrong way.
Awesome.
And go for it. Women, like Lena, you were so right. Men, the job description, they're a 30% fit and they will apply. We wait for the 95% fit and we still worry. So apply, go forward, lean in. Let's shatter the stereotypes that exist.
I've spent my daughter's applying for jobs and changing her career. And I spent a lot of time encouraging her. It doesn't matter if you're not 100% qualified for the job. If it makes sense, apply. So I love to hear that. Lena, your advice to women looking to change skills, upskill, reskill, look at new careers.
I will say, from my own perspective, find something that's really interesting to you. Even if you have a job that you're doing 110%, if you can find 5% of time to connect with someone who's working on something that you're interested in, it might spark a real interest. And it also lets people know you have other interests. And in your daily work, if you can, get yourself on a project that you're really interested in. But if you find something that you're really passionate about, just start doing something about it. Make a small step, find a project, read a book about it, find out more about those careers, but make a small step just to move, because that's all it takes, really. I was doing a job that took me about 110% to do. I found something I was really interested in. And before I knew it, I had read all these books. I had a certification. Not even my real job. And then I got promoted into that job. But I had put it out there that I was interested, that I had some passion around it, and that I was willing to take the time and do the work to, learn about it. So I think that's my advice. Find something you're interested in, take a small step and move on it.
I love the small step notion. Zabeen, your advice.
So a lot of ditto. For me, it's been about finding my purpose and meaning at work. So I've been very deliberate about articulating a personal purpose. For me, it's unlocking the potential of people and building inclusive prosperity. And in this stage of my life also, it is something that I use as a lens to decide on whether or not I'm going to take something on. And from a career point of view, I went into HR opportunistically. If something was put in front of me, just as I had done for the prior 20 years. But I discovered as I was really reflecting around what I want to do, that I found that sweet spot where I could have an impact on the lives of 80,000 people, and I could drive the performance of the company at the same time. The other piece I would say is really find a career or a job where you can grow and you can contribute. For me, contribute is about contributing to the organization and serving a bigger purpose. And I think more and more people are looking for that. And finally, around the work-life piece, it's interesting how we all have stories about 11-year-olds. I won't tell mine because it's not easy to tell in a few words. But absolutely, there's this element of talking to people about it. And I would extend that to close, trusted friends. That's something that I didn't do as much while I was in my full-time, full-on, but I do a lot more now. And there's a lot of advice that comes through that, but it also really strengthens the relationship. But be deliberate. What are the non-negotiables for you? I turned down my first executive promotion because I just come back from my second maternity leave. My kids were both under the age of 3. I hadn't figured out how to be the mom I wanted to be and make a career, a big job work. And it took me I actually didn't consult with anyone, to be honest. I knew it was a gut thing for me. I cannot do this. And I turned it down on the spot. I was very transparent, but I was also clear to myself, if my organization then put the brakes on offering me opportunities, I was in the wrong place. And so those are important, deliberate decisions. And a year later, I went into HR, and things turned out pretty good. So, you know, there are times when you just have to go with your gut.
Thank you. And I love, Zabeen, that you can say no, but you know what you need to do. So we are unfortunately at the end of our time for our discussion this afternoon. I'm glad I was able to bring in a couple of the Q&A questions that came in while we were doing that. I really enjoyed the dialogue. So thank you so much for your time, Rushmi, Lenna, Candace, and Zabeen. So much information, so many wonderful shared experiences. I have many more questions that I'm going to follow up with you afterwards on, but really appreciate your insights in sharing where you see opportunities.